Welcome back. Today, we continue to present the questions of the first part, Section D, Cost Management, Variable and Fixed Overhead Costs. Follow the channel to receive all questions from multiple sources, old and new, until 2023. If you have any questions or requests, please write them in the comments and you will be answered. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel to reach the largest number of people interested in the CMA certificate. Let's get started. Variable and Fixed Overhead Costs. Question 1. Which of the following describes the process for determining the predetermined overhead rate using a normal costing system? A. Actual annual overhead cost divided by actual annual operating activity in the application base. B. Estimated annual overhead cost divided by actual annual operating activity in the application base. C. Estimated annual overhead cost divided by estimated annual operating activity in the application base. D. Actual annual overhead cost divided by estimated annual operating activity in the application base. The answer is C. Estimated annual overhead cost divided by estimated annual operating activity in the application base. Correct. Using a normal costing system, the predetermined overhead rate equals the estimated annual overhead cost divided by the estimated annual operating activity in the application base. Question 2. A company produces a wide variety of handcrafted rocking chairs. The most appropriate allocation base for allocating production supervisor salaries to the products is A. Direct labor hours. B. Machine hours. C. Number of products. D. Sales dollars. The answer is A. Direct labor hours. Direct labor hours would be the most appropriate allocation base for allocation production supervisors' salaries to products in the production of handcrafted rocking chairs. Question 3. CJ Incorporated applied $15,500 of manufacturing overhead and incurred actual manufacturing overhead of $14,050. Before adjustments, the work-in-process account balance was $48,250. And the cost of goods sold balance was $50,725. What will the balance in the cost of goods sold account be after the over or under applied overhead entry is made? A. $46,800. B. $49,700. C. $49,275. D. $52,202. The answer is C. $49,275. Correct. Applied overhead is greater than actual overhead, so overhead has been over-applied. The amount of over-applied overhead is $1,450, $15,500 minus $14,050. Because overhead was over-applied, cost of goods sold needs to be decreased by the amount that overhead was over-applied. Therefore, the adjusted cost of goods sold equals $49,275. $50,725 minus $1,450. Question 4. Malloy Medical Supplies needs to budget their sales-related travel expenses for the year. Their travel expenses for their 6 salespeople tend to fluctuate with weather and the release of new supplies. Based on the following information and the high-low method, what is Malloy's fixed cost for travel? A. $101. B. $790. C. $1,638. D. $383. The answer is B. $790. Correct. The month with the highest number of days of travel is September, and the month with the lowest number of days of travel is December, so use the data for those months for the high-low method. The variable cost per day of travel equals $225 per day, $23,740 minus $10,015, divided by 102 minus 41. The fixed cost equals the total cost minus the variable cost. Using December's data, the fixed cost is $790, $10,015 minus 41 times $225. Which of the following statements is true about underapplied overhead? A. Actual overhead was less than the actual cost of goods sold. B. Estimated overhead was more than the actual cost of goods sold. C. Actual overhead was more than the estimated overhead charged to the work-in-process account. D. Actual overhead was less than the estimated overhead charged to the work-in-process account. The answer is C. Actual overhead was more than the estimated overhead charged to the work-in-process account. Correct. Under-applied overhead means that estimated, applied, overhead was less than, or under, the actual overhead. Question 6. Regarding plant-wide overhead rates, departmental overhead rates, and activity-based costing, ABC, overhead costing, which of the following is true? A. ABC overhead rates are the best selection for processes that are very homogeneous. B. Cost drivers, allocation base, for all three methods are selected because of assumed or determined cause and effect relationships with costs. C. Each method uses only one cost driver, allocation base, but multiple cost pools. D. Departmental overhead is the most accurate of the methods. The answer is B. Cost drivers, allocation base, for all three methods are selected because of assumed or determined cause and effect relationships with costs. Cost drivers, allocation base, should have a cause and effect relationship on costs. Obviously, the plant-wide overhead rate will have the most difficulty with this goal. Question 7. John Shing, cost accountant at Starlet Company, is developing departmental factory overhead application rates for the company's tooling and fabricating departments. The budgeted overhead for each department and the data for one job are. Using the departmental overhead application rates, total overhead applied to job number 231 in the tooling and fabricating departments will be A. $78, B. $344, C. $225, D. $303. The answer is C. $225. The total overhead applied to job number 231 in the tooling and fabricating departments can be calculated as total overhead applied, job number 231 equals tooling overhead rate per direct labor hour times number of direct labor hours on job number 231, plus fabricating overhead rate per direct labor hour times number of direct labor hours on job number 231. Tooling overhead rate equals $8,625 divided by 460 total direct labor hours equals $18.75 per direct labor hour. Fabricating overhead rate equals $16,120 divided by 620 total direct labor hours equals $26 per direct labor hour. Total overhead applied, job number 231 equals $18.75 times 12 direct labor hours, plus $26 times 3 direct labor hours. Total overhead applied, job number 231 equals $225 plus $78 equals $303. Question 8. Bookworld is an online bookstore specializing in used books. Bookworld sold 3,400 copies of the Harry Potter books in June and 1,150 in September. Shipping costs for the 2 months were $8,020 and $4,015, respectively. Using these 2 months' data as a basis for the high-low method, the fixed cost is best estimated as A. $4,005, B. $1,968, C. $3,400, D. $1,150. The answer is B. $1,968. Correct. First, calculate the variable cost per book sold as the change in cost divided by the change in quantity, then calculate the fixed cost by subtracting the variable cost from the total cost using either the June or September cost and volume. The variable cost equals $1.78 per book sold, $8,020 minus $4,015, divided by 3,400 minus 1,150. Using the numbers for June, the fixed cost is $1,968, $8,020 minus 3,400 times $1.78. Question 9. Goff's Manufacturing had underapplied overhead totaling $5,000, which was not considered material in amount, during the period. To dispose of this underapplied overhead, Goff should A. Debit, increase, cost of goods sold for $5,000. B. Credit, decrease, cost of goods sold for $5,000. C. Debit, increase, work-in-process inventory for $5,000. D. Credit, decrease, work-in-process inventory for $5,000. The answer is A. Debit, increase, cost of goods sold for $5,000. Correct. If the overhead is underapplied, the applied overhead is less than, or under, actual overhead. Because the amount is not material, GOF should debit cost of goods sold to dispose of the underapplied overhead. Question 10. A manufacturer of mobile phones has identified two models for analysis under activity-based costing. Each model is associated with two activity pools, soldering and assembly. Model J requires 14 solders, and Model P requires 24 solders. Total direct labor hours required for models J and P are 0.35 per unit and 1.15 per unit, respectively. Factory overhead amounting to $550,000 is assigned as follows: $375,000 to the soldering cost pool and the balance to the assembly cost pool. The cost driver for soldering is the number of solders, and the cost driver for assembly is direct labor hours. Furthermore, $295,000 of product design overhead is also allocated to these two product lines and is split equally between them. What is the factory overhead cost per driver unit for soldering if the company manufactures 500,000 phones, of which 65% are Model J? A. $0.0337 per solder. B. $0.0429 per solder. C. $0.0824 per solder. D. $0.0892 per solder. The answer is B. $0.0429 per solder. Correct. The company manufactures 325,000 Model J phones, 500,000 times 65%, and 175,000 Model P phones, 500,000 times 35%. The Model J phones require 4,550,000 solders, 325,000 times 14, and the Model P phones require 4,200,000 solders, 175,000 times 24. Therefore, there are 8,750,000 total solders, 4,550,000 plus 4,200,000. The cost per solder equals $0.0429, $375,000 divided by 8,750,000 solders.